This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
All right, we're going to start the meeting. Everybody, welcome. Thank you all for coming. Your first order of business is to approve the minutes of October 27th. There was no meeting in November. We need a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes from October 27th.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we have to do a roll call.
Okay, Dan.
Yes.
Scott. Absent. John.
Yes.
Andy. Joe. Say. Peg.
Yes.
Nate.
Aye.
Harry.
Harry.
Aye. Harry.
Everybody?
So,
Yeah.
Now, if you're here to speak about the clock, is that why you're here, guys? Okay, so we'll get to you when we get to the clock. City officials, other than what's on the agenda, I want to go over the item you put in. Have anything else, though, Jamie?
I don't have anything more than what's on the agenda, other than the state match that came in.
Is that what this is?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try to increase this so people can see it. But why don't you explain it, Jamie?
You can zoom just a little bit more. So the 22 surcharge state match that we received as of November 22nd was in total $330,000, which is less than what we had budgeted, but it does not include the extra $20 million that the state legislature added from the surplus. So we'll be getting a second distribution of additional funds to be determined what that amount will be. And I will update that spreadsheet and send it back out once we get that information.
So we budgeted
about twice that.
more than 330
Well,
from the
so
state?
we always only budget the what we get. We budget conservatively. So what we actually figured into the budget was around 330.
Mm-hmm.
Then we did our set asides based off of like a $600,000 or $500,000 match.
You can see historically, it used to be 100%, guys. I always complain about this. And then it went down pretty low. FY22 was a huge match, 78%.
There was one of those 20 million that was in the budget.
So we're going to have 20 million, so we might get a big match. Okay.
We may go up a bit.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this is good news. More money to spend. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it over to the, I don't have any new information on account balances or open projects. Nothing's changed. Does anybody want to go over that? I didn't call it up.
I don't have it prepared.
I could use last month's meeting because it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed, right?
I haven't updated in a while. I have not received the reports from
All right.
the auditor.
Well, when we get those reports, we'll do that. So Easthampton Housing Authority,
Hi,
why don't you state your name for the record?
it's Deborah Walker.
You don't have to stand up, Deborah.
Okay, all right. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted to come in person to thank you all. Because 6 years ago, I requested the fire suppressors, the fire stoppers for all the units, which is 188. You could tell us, and I'm really grateful for that. And you had said we could come back in 6 years and be funded again. So it's the 6 years, but I wanted to first let you know that you've saved lives. We had 2 of these go off, and this kind of shows you how they explode. Both people had fallen asleep, so they were kitchen fires. The sad part is, we didn't find out about these fires till I did my annual inspections this year. The people never called to say they had it, so for some time they were without any protection. So what happens is they blow open with any kind of heat, so they go off before the smoke detectors even go off. So I don't know Constantine, is he a captain or what? Captain and the chief Norris both came at different times for these, and they both said that this did save lives and it saved the property. So I thought you should all know that. Because sometimes you only hear negative and maybe don't get thanked a lot. So we're really here to thank you, and to let you know that we didn't have to come back and ask for funding again, because DHCD put in our budget last year the money for every housing authority to be able to do this. So just last month, we replaced all of them. So over
Do they have a limit on expiration date?
6 years.
6 years.
6 years. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're good for 6 more years. Joe, because I'll be gone in 2. So we'll have to do that.
Joe's the housing authority representative with everybody.
Yes. So this is what they're like if you've never seen them. And that's the picture on the side of the damage, and you'll see how one is open.
And they explode with fire suppressant material.
Yeah, it puts it right out. Which in 5 years, nothing happened, but this last year, 2 units.
Are the units sprinkler protected too?
No, just Dickinson Court is.
That's interesting. Not required, not.
No, because when they were built, that wasn't what was required.
Well, thank God you had those.
Well, no, thank you. I wanted to let you know that it really helped and appreciated it. So I
Well,
want to become a person. Okay,
we like positive stories.
good, good.
I remember you coming, which means, wow, I can't believe it's been maybe 6 years. I'm like, oh my God, that was 6 years.
I got you beat by 22.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, no, yeah, I don't mean to.
I'll have to come up with.
There's no
something to
competitions
do.
here,
All right, I will certainly not.
All right.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice holiday.
You too.
Bye-bye.
So now, last time we met, we talked about getting an opinion on the town clock and getting some estimates. Greg Rowland, who has sent us some estimates on the cost of replacing the clock. We have gotten some interesting opinions already. Do we own it? I actually we sent out, Jamie did great work in getting together a list of things, are these things we need to worry about? And basically, I talked to Mark today because he called me and I asked, do you have any questions? He said, well, this is pretty simple. If the city thinks you own the clock and the church thinks the city owns the clock, you own the clock. A tremendous amount of evidence. In fact, Mr. Tennant here, who's been involved a long time, has a Easthampton Historical Society, what do you call, document, or Gazette article talks about the clock. I guess we actually purchased the clock for $4,200 in 1946. Prices have gone up.
The city purchased the clock from the church?
No, we purchased a new clock to replace the old one. The old one was there since 1852.
That was $375.
The first one?
Sam Williston bought the first one.
Right, the Williston's all over this. This is cool. Anyway, I was very happy with that from the city attorney today. And I asked if we could do some formal agreement, and apparently that they exist elsewhere. An agreement which state finally the church and city mayor that says, yes, we all agree that he owns the clock. In that agreement, we would have to negotiate. What is the clock? Now, obviously,
Right.
It's the clock face. It's the mechanics of how the clock operates. In my view, it's the bell. And I think we should negotiate replacing cracked timbers that look the clock. That's what I think we should own. But that's a negotiation, which once we get this, he's gonna talk about that in his opinion, and then we'll set up some kind of an agreement. The other thing he talked about today, Jamie, was a license rather than an easement, a license that says someone from the city, the church, with the church present with 4 hours to inspect the clock. He said, That seems reasonable. But agreement is important because there's nothing else. There's a lot of evidence, circumstantial as it may be, that we own this clock. If we own the clock, it's a lot easier to defend purchasing it. Now, the other thing that's interesting, John, this came from Stuart Signor. We worried that we would have to replace it. And when I go through the pictures that Greg sent, the actual mechanics of the original clock, which would cost a fortune, they'd have to be a machine. John, it was no, you fix mechanic. The Bell Striker, which is Greg sent us all those. I don't know if you guys have read those, but and also the clock mechanics can be modern. And I'll show you the pictures of the old ones so you can see that's a good thing, because otherwise that would be prohibitive, the cost of that.
I would just add that I also reached out to the Mass Historical listserv to ask just what other communities have done, because there's a lot of these older clocks in Massachusetts, and I got about 15 or
Yeah, Mark
so.
said that too.
What's that?
He said 15 too to me, because he must have looked it up.
Oh, no. I got about 15 replies from different municipalities and their experiences, and got a lot of recommendations for the consultants that they've used to restore their clocks, internals, externals, and things like that. So if it is city-owned, then we'll have to go through some sort of procurement process and we'll be reaching out to other vendors.
Oh, you mean to get it? If it's city-owned, in other words, we'd have to get a bid on it, because it's above $10,000. What's the rule on that?
Well,
We got for this company that does it. I'm talking about the repair.
But I think that was a request so that we'd be able to potentially put an application together.
Right.
That's not necessarily the vendor that we would use, right? Or the city would use.
I mean, it would just depend on the scope of work. We'd have to identify a scope of work and then put that out there, because depending on, whether or not we're looking at restoration or recreation or replacement with new parts, that's going to change. And all of these vendors come in with their well, we think we should do this, and it's not worth saving it. And then someone else comes in and goes, oh my gosh, this is a pristine whatever, and then they have all they need is a little bit of grease, and
Right.
we'll rebuild it for you.
Okay, well, there is a procurement process because we own the clock. That's obvious. Historically speaking, obviously the clock face is important for historical purposes, and the material for that. I'm imagining that we'd have to make the clock look as it should have looked back at, this is a program from 1902. I'm imagining that's historically we'd have to do that. But do we have to use the wood that was there, or can we use modern, maybe vinyl that looks like wood in order to? And that's somebody that if precedent PA funds have been do exactly really helps. That's something I want to look at. These town players have they, because that way, to me, precedent how we proceed. Now, this is a long process. Number one, I think we're getting an opinion. I know we're getting an opinion that we own the clock. Then an application has to be put in. I'm imagining the planning board will put the application in. Yeah, planning department. I suppose, didn't I?
Yeah.
The planning department will put the application in. Whether they want to add a project manager is up to Jeff and Jamie, but that application would be to give a round figure of funds based on estimates we've received, which Greg has supplied. Now, I want to share some of wonderful pictures we've gotten. Because I think they're very interesting. So here's our clock. I'm in the church. This shows something that is interesting. I imagine this is the material surrounding the clock, and you can see these are wood planks. But the question will be, John, and with everybody historically, do we have to replace the actual wood, or can we use materials that mimic that, but that will last a long time? In my view, I hope we can, because I imagine this is from 1946, Greg, right? You think that's?
Well, I think this is part of the problem, is that we have the clock, it was built in 1852 originally.
The original clock, yeah.
And then when the city purchased a new clock in 1946, what was actually purchased, was it the clock faces or was it the clock works? And so the clock faces could be historic to the 1852 if it was just the clock works that were replaced in 1946, or maybe it was the whole clock faces and the
Well,
clock works.
The point is,
And so
what,
we need to do
what are the
research.
rules on historic
Well,
preservation?
so for historic restoration, you need to pick the period in time what you're restoring it to. So it could be chosen that we're restoring the 1946 clock to its original state, or we're going to the 1852 clock to its original state. But it would depend on what's there, what's remaining, what's intact, and that's where we would
It
need.
might not change much as far as materials between those two times.
I mean, it may not, but it could be that, you know, if the clock faces are 1852, but the clock works themselves are 1946.
But there's no way to know that, right?
Well, there is, because people who are historic preservationists know how to look into this. And
You understand the construction, what the construction's.
so there'll be dates on things, or
Type the nails or the.
Yeah.
John, do you
And I think
know
that's-
whether we can? Do we have to preserve it that way, or can we preserve it to make it look from 200 feet away that it is the original clock, but use modern faux wood?
So my understanding is that already we've got indicators that as far as the internal stuff, we can modernize that. As far
Right.
as the external stuff, the statement is it's always preferable to use original materials and methods when possible. And that caveat extends to the fact that sometimes those materials are no longer available, or sometimes it's not possible. I would point out as well, before we get too deep into the concern about what the materials are, the goal is the preservation anyway. So in the case that maybe it's made out of oak again, the concern for us is that it's long lasting, not whether it's a composite or real wood. Can we make that last long enough that it doesn't have to be replaced again in 5, 10, 15 years? So there may be other options besides the material itself.
And that's what a consultant would do for us, right?
So I spoke with, just one vendor, but this vendor came out and put together the photographs and the report and so forth. It was pretty illuminating, because
That's right
obviously
down
I
there.
can't go up there and hang off the side of the building, but this company, Verdon, specializes in clock restorations and this kind of work. So, and they highly recommend using a longer lasting faux wood. And that's what they have been using for a lot of the, public clock towers, whether they're on university campuses or in cities and so forth, because it doesn't require going up on a regular basis and having to repaint or sort of maintain, and so you don't get the kind of deterioration that we see in some of the photos. So that was what he was, recommending. It's what they, he also said the cost of actually the custom wood, which is the curvature and the Roman numerals and so forth. If they have several different designs that are basically similar to the Roman numerals that we currently have. So this vendor is able to essentially simulate what is existing right now, except in faux wood. The cost for something that is actual wood would potentially be 3 times as much, just to have the detail of the custom woodwork done. It's not impossible, and he knows somebody. I think he left the name of a woodworker who does specialize in that kind of thing, and maybe Jeff, you have more knowledge than I do about that. But
The question I would,
but that was it certainly makes for an argument that if Bowood is a possibility, none of us are going to be, community-wise, are going to be inspecting this at close range. This is something that, at a distance, we want it to look like the clock has always looked. And be easy to maintain over the long haul.
To me, that's the practical. We're preserving the look historically, and we are going to preserve its function. So I don't want to spend $50,000 more dollars of CPA funds to use oak.
Can I just point out that that is the point of the CPA law, is that it's supposed to provide these for projects that are historic preservation projects. The CPA provides a mechanism to access more money for projects that have to do. So we have to quite make the decision of should we use a fake slate or a real slate when restoring the slate roof, or in this case, fake wood or real wood. If the art preservation consultants come in and say it should be done with wood, then I mean that is the point of the CPA program, is to allow communities to tap into these dedicated funds to make
All I'm saying is
preservation
that there
happen.
is precedent where CPA funds have been used and the face of the clock has been restored historically with wood. To me, gives us, because it's our decision whether we do that or not. But Davey's right. If the consultant says it has to be from the CPA's point of view, we'd have to make a decision. But I'd like to see if there is any other choices. Scott?
Yeah, I think, because I think Jamie's point is well said, and but I also think the maintenance, I think there's relevance here. There's a lot here. I think once we get numbers on what that means, like, is this a $5,000 difference? Is this $100,000 difference? That's going to really drive, because I do think there's value in there is greater authenticity if it's restored. And now, is there a cost there? Sure. So what is that cost? Once we have numbers, I think we're going to be able to make that. And I think the consultant would be able, and what you're saying is someone's that you talk to, is it would be able to eventually show both those scenarios, right? Like,
But the CPA can't pay for the maintenance going forward in the future.
Right, and the city has, because there's never been an agreement or there isn't an agreement that we know of, the city hasn't done maintenance on it, and the church hasn't done maintenance on it. And so for the last 20 years, the only maintenance that has happened, or maybe 30 years, has been what Jeff has been able to do and volunteering, and what that 2008 project from CPA funds to repair some of the clock
Just
work.
repainted it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to get your.
But I mean, when
Input, Jeff.
we did a closeout report from that basically said that on a yearly basis, someone should come up there and paint the clock faces, and make sure that the roofs are not leaking.
I think you're obviously right. It has to have a part of the agreement, has to be moving forward maintenance.
But
Right.
Normally CPA can't pay for maintenance kind of things.
Correct, but if we're establishing ownership,
Okay.
then like every building or thing that the city owns, there's a maintenance schedule with it, and we
Right.
have to figure out what that maintenance schedule is. So there are obviously implications for
Mhm.
if the agreement is.
Well, we have to work out that. I want to let Mr. Tennant speak here. Well, you tell them your history, Tim.
Well, my part of it is that back in the 1960s, and before that, there was a fellow from Amherst that maintained the clock. And he retired. And at that point, my father took over maintenance of the clock and did it for 10, 15 years. And then basically I took it over from him.
In a paid capacity?
What's that?
In a paid capacity?
Yes.
Paid
And
by the city.
yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, they were all, everyone was paid. The keeper of the town clock was a town position.
Really? Okay.
So in the 1990s, I believe. When did we switch to be a city? It was-
1986.
95.
Somehow I remember that date.
Okay, because I guess according to this article, the town manager, because it was $700 a year, they decided that they weren't going to fund the clock anymore. And my aunt was town accountant at that point. I think she may have actually been.
Mary Brewer. Does anybody
Yeah.
else know that name?
She may have been retired at that point, but she got the DAR to come up with the funds to pay for the electricity for the clock. And I had been taking care of the clock, and it was still a technicality. They used to send out a postcard telling me, do you want to keep your position? And I forgot to send it back. And there was another guy in Easthampton who said that he wanted the big $200 a year or something. And he took it, but then all of a sudden when it became a volunteer position, he wasn't interested anymore. So it came back to me. And so whenever that was, 1980s to 90s, I've just volunteered to take care of it since then. And certainly during that time, we've identified major things that should be done in terms of the maintenance of the outside of the clock and everything. You know, some of that was put together, and some work was done in 2008, was it? But certainly there were a lot of things that needed to be done at that point that were not touched. And, you know, I love wood. I love the old clock. I've worked on Easthampton's, Northampton's, Hatfield's, Williamsburg's, and I think they're neat. On the other hand, for 40 years, I took care of the Western campus, and there were a lot of neat things that we just couldn't afford to do. And so, you know, certainly this clock could be made to run again just the way it is. But if you really want to get historical, that clock has been electrified, and the clock originally was run by, if you go up in the tower, there's big boxes, wooden boxes that run in channels that are filled with stones. And those had to be wound up every week. And there was a pendulum on it, and the pendulum had to be given another torque. So, you know, it depends on how far back and how much you want to do. And, you know, I'm a lover of wood, but I put vinyl siding on houses because you can't always afford to do it. And this thing being 80 feet in the air and with one face that's kind of around the corner, means you're into an 85 to 120 foot lift every time you want to go up there, which is just getting the lifts there is thousands of dollars. And so, you know, if you really should be checking the paint every year, then it's a bigger yearly budget. And so, you know, I don't have a fight in this one way or the other. From the practical point of view, I think the proposal to use materials that are longer lasting. And unfortunately, the old oak wood and stuff, and I don't think that's actually oak, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, but you can't buy wood today that's milled from logs the way the old ones were. I mean, like porch floors that we had for flooring that would last 100 years. We put brand new, the best fir flooring you can buy, and 5 years later it's rotting out. So, you know, those materials, even if you bought what you think's the equivalent of that, you're not going to get that, and you are going to need to budget significantly for maintenance to keep that up.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Bennett. This is obviously as a mechanics. Oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
So I had a question for Jeff, and this actually speaks to something you said earlier, Dan, as far as like what actually is the clock. And just as someone who's been up there a lot, do you get the sense that the structure, the steeple is in good shape? I mean, because obviously that isn't the city's, but I think we do need to be aware, we don't want to be putting city money to repair a clock in a place that isn't sound. And if it's not sound, is there money from the church to make it such? And I didn't know, just being up there, kind of what your sense of.
We have pictures of some of the structure in the other one, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the wood that's in the faces, there are, in these pictures are nice pictures, but they don't actually show some of the worst. There are where there is no wood at all, and there's just hardware cloth up there, because if you don't put something in there, then the pigeons nest in there. Clocks, Hoyoke had an issue where they had 4 floors fell down in their tower because the pigeons had gotten in there, and there was so much pigeon manure, which actually rots out the wood and everything. So honestly, if there's structural damage to the building now, I would say if anything is being done by the lack of maintenance to the clock. And so it's a very valid question. The bell's another question. The church rings the bell, the clock rings the bell. Where does that fall? This proposal, I think, allows for a system that allows the bell to be rung for either purpose, but it does take away. Right now, the church swings the bell.
No.
They did.
It is.
Yes, because when I worked on the clock, they would swing the bell out of the way so the clock wouldn't strike.
Okay.
So, and so, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that it's tough to, where do you draw the line?
And I think that'll be part of the negotiation.
Yeah, and I think if it's properly maintained, then there should be no damage. But if the city decides, like they did in whenever it was in the 1990s, to stop funding it, then damage could occur to the structure of the building because the clock isn't being maintained.
Well, that's a big question. You can see here in these pictures, there is an old mechanics, and I was happy to hear from Stuart Signor that there's no problem replacing these with modern mechanics. I would think that some of this stuff can't be done without remilling all of the gears and stuff.
What's broken right now about the internals, the mechanics?
Yeah, if you go back, is there?
It looks like it's all broken. Let me tell you.
Yeah, well, right now it's partially taken apart. There's right in this picture here, there's the 4 gears up on the top that feed the faces, and there's a shaft that drops down below that. There's a gear on the bottom, and that gear is just spinning on the shaft. And so when I got taken apart and didn't get up to finish it up, but whether there's a pin that's broken or whether it was a press fit originally, and because things just turn harder as they get older, it broke loose. But yeah, anything could be fixed. But if the face, where the gears are at the face, because the shaft goes out, that shaft is turning once an hour, and then you have to drive the hour hand to just turn 1/12 of a revolution per hour. All of those gears have so much play in them that is with the way the counterbalances on the hands are, when you come up towards the hour, once you hit the hour and it flops over, you have 3 or 4 minutes, and you can accept that it's a 100-year-old clock and that's the way it is. Or if you're going to spend a bunch of money on it, you kind of want it to.
Oh, it's 102 years old. I think it would be impractical and fiscally irresponsible, from my point of view, not to replace the mechanics. And it would be very, very expensive to try and replace these. Let me go to the other one. No, wrong one. These are the proposals. This shows the bell, I think. And one of the things I wanted to show here's the old bell, which we wouldn't replace. What the proposal would be is to get a new automatic striker that rings the bell. not the, what is it, 2-ton hammer that's in there. And you can see here that there is some damage to the actual structure, it looks like. So in my view, that ought to, if we're gonna fix it, we ought to fix that too. It's just my opinion. And that's up to the committee, but you can see how old this is. And I think, the yoke in a proposal includes replacing the sidearm and headbolts for the safety of the bell. So this company were to do the work, would do out of that work. Is that your impression, Greg? They would.
Yeah.
So we
Assessment and built their proposal with their assessment.
see how rusty and things are. And this is my opinion, it's part of the clock. When I first moved here, hearing it the hour, so. Here's this huge hammer as it hit the bell. And apparently that's not something we want to do anymore.
So can I just chime in a little bit? And
Well, of course, anytime you want.
I feel like I want people to know where the Historic Commission stands. I stand on this, just to be really clear about it. There isn't any question about the desire to preserve the clock. That there's no debate or argument about that. There's questions about where does it start, where does it stop? You know, does it include the steeple? You know, that kind of thing. There were questions about who might be the project manager if this were to be taken on, but there isn't any debate about the desire to save it. I just want to make that really clear. We reference and remember, as part of the master plan, one of the things that was debated and determined was that we would seek to preserve what mattered to us about the historical item, whatever it is, whatever the historical element. And I think that one of the things that I might like to propose in future even is that we consider something, I don't know, maybe we call it like an aesthetic preservation, where the point of the clock is the function of the clock, not the mechanism that drives it. I don't think anybody in town is saying, it matters to me what makes that bell ring and those hands turn. I just want the clock to be accurate and I want to hear the bell. And so I think maybe moving forward, we might even be able to address this because it's the kind of thing that seems to come up. But there's lots of other towns that have set a precedent. There's lots of support for everything we're asking for. I personally think it's just a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and laying out the details.
I don't necessarily want to go into the Verdun proposals. You've seen them. It comes out to $114,000, $142. The clock is the most expensive part and the bell striker, $20,000. That's just one estimate. And I think we also have to get a historic consultant. If the planning department wants the consultant, first of all, if we own the clock, which we are establishing we do, it's going to be the planning department's decision where to move forward with the consultant, in my view, and then to make an application for enough funds to do whatever we decide to do. I'd like to see that application. I don't know, Jamie, by January, is that too soon? Probably not.
Definitely too soon.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, if we get this from the city solicitor before end of the month.
You're going to get it tomorrow.
Okay. And then we have to figure out what the next steps are with
The
actually
letter of agreement.
formalizing what that agreement is, what the, what's included, and then what happened, access, and what happens if we, if in the future we have another 20-year period where the city decides not to maintain it, what happens then? Because I think it's reasonable that to have those types of discussions in the agreement. There'll be some back and forth. I don't think we could.
Yeah, I said that to myself. I said, "You crazy, Dan?" Scott.
The other thing, the other info I want before voting on application is about the church, both the structure, the building surrounding because the clock ends at some point, but it's obviously up in the air. It's held up by the entire structure. And so I think before voting on this, it would be nice to have some sort of information about the structure of the church and also the financial health of the church. Like if the church is insolvent, what happens to the building? What happens to our clock?
Mhm.
So I feel like those are two pieces that I would want to know before voting on an application.
Well, yeah, that's the vote. I'm sure Greg will speak to that at some point.
I can, and I do want to say that, I think Jeff was the name of the guy who's very knowledgeable, who I spoke with about this, and it was Mike Garjan, who initially, talked with, Jeff from Verdun and arranged the meeting with me, so there could be a little bit of a handoff. But he's volunteered to come to any meeting that we want. He'd be able to kind of talk a little bit about maybe the structure.
Yeah.
And because he was up there most recently and doing an assessment. But he sort of volunteered his presence at any of these meetings if we wanted to kind of give that context.
Given that there's a lot of town clocks in the world and in the country, God forbid church becomes all the clock stuff.
That could be part of the memorandum of understanding as well, would be that whatever future use of the church, that is a requirement that be dealt with. Certainly those kind of things are written into those understandings.
That's a good point.
I
I just wanted to put something in to just address
Protect the
that
city.
scenario.
Yeah.
I'd just like to acknowledge that Don Jordan is the president of the Board of Trustees of the church in the room today.
Thank you, Dan. I didn't know.
So anyhow, he's,
But I think you would.
some of those.
And I'm wishing the church well, just to be clear. But you understand.
Yes.
I mean, to know kind of.
Very valid point.
But yeah, those details, I think, my understanding, Don, is that, like, those are kind of details that the church is ready to kind of figure out. And I think there's a willingness, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Don, but to
You're doing fine.
to put something in writing. I think that there's a willingness to do that if the city's wants a memorandum of understanding.
Well, I think that's what we do want, because I don't want to have to go through this who owns the clock again. I don't want the future chair of the CPA 20 years from now. Do we own this clock? No, we're going to have something in writing, an agreement put in place that can be referenced for the future. And I think in that agreement, Jamie, and this will be something for the mayor's got to sign the agreement anyway. What about-
It might have to go through city council too.
No, I talked to Mark. It doesn't have to unless we do an easement to get into it, because there's no procurement. We own it.
Right, but again, when the church was sold from the Payson Congregational Church to the Easthampton Congregational Church in 1918, there's no discussion in that deed about the clock. So if there's no legal instrument recording the city's ownership, then if it's filed at the Register of Deeds, then it's something that can be looked at. It's known to any future purchasers or city.
Well, I'm relying on the city attorney's opinion on that.
Sure.
And we agreed that a memorandum of agreement would be all that would be necessary at this time.
Right, and then maybe we can file that at the Registry of Deeds,
Right.
so it can be attached to
I'm just
it.
trying to prevent a process that even goes longer, but goes through the city council and all that. The appropriation rule and all these questions we brought up, we have a memorandum of agreement. And one of the biggest questions we have with a lot of things we do here is who's maintaining this? And that has to be the agreement. Why fix the clock if a future mayor, or like they said in 1990, they stopped paying for repairs? A lot of but and we do change the historic preservation and balance it against the practical application to keep it going. And that goes to the face of the clock, the mechanics access. Oh, that to me, again, maybe I'll work with Jamie. Let's find some precedents. Has CPA funds allowed that? You know, the faux wood versus the real wood. But that's just a matter of precedents to me will help us in that decision making. I like the idea of using real wood, of course, but then there's a practical application if you have to paint it.
Yeah, just a matter of maintenance.
And maintenance is going to be a question the mayor's going to ask. Wait a minute, that's going to cost $10,000 every 5 years to do that or whatever. So again, that's part of what's coming forward. So maybe by February we'll have an application. Who knows? We're going to work on this. I certainly, as a chair, before I leave this office, I would like to see us get to a point where that clock is working. And I wanted to ask, this is not a motion for approval or anything. I want a poll of this. We want to work toward this, do we not? And I'm just going to ask all of you. Greg, obviously, he does. Joe, what do you think? Definitely, Scott?
Yeah, I mean,
You want information?
I want information, but yes. I mean, Scott's, yeah.
Jay?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Andy? Harry?
Well, first of all, I want to apologize for bringing this up to begin with, but I would be in favor of it.
Why are you apologizing? I think it's a great thing.
It's a lot of bigger thing than I thought it would be. We'll put it that way, you know.
Well, yeah, we open a can of worms, but it's a good can to get out there. If we're going to do it, we should do it.
Yeah, it's exactly the kind of thing we're concerned about. And as far as I can tell, it's exactly the point of having a historical commission, is to try to preserve the things that matter to us and less about whether it's real wood or fake wood and more about the aesthetic appeal, it's the physical structure. If it were to fall down, we'd have a serious problem in the middle of town. So there's that element, but I can't imagine a more exemplary task than making this work. And
Isn't that church already a historical building?
it is. I mean, we can't as CPA necessarily.
Is it on the
do things-
registry?
No, but it's,
No.
But it's been around since you're telling me. I mean, that.
I can tell you, 1852.
So I'm thinking you don't get much more historical than that.
well, this is my point. It would be the kind of building we would have a real, a lot to say if it
About
were to be
something,
up for sale or in
Right.
disrepair. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so
So you were asking about the steeple, the framework around it.
yeah, how well is it?
Okay. Well, Mike Gargin, who is the person who's most recently been working on the clock, he stopped the bell from swinging, and right now when you pull the bell, a clapper just goes and hits the bell. What he said about the steeple is that steeple's in okay shape as long as we're not going to have the bell swinging
A lot of
around.
vibration.
So if you
Well-
don't insist on getting the bell to swing again, then the steeple's
That's,
just fine.
I'm not going to insist.
Well, you
that.
also, because when the bell swung,
Yeah,
the way it struck, what they pointed out in their report as being a problem is the way that you're ringing it now, not the way it was when it was swinging. The clapper that's hitting the bell that's causing the problem that they said could cause the bell to fail is the way it's being rung now, that moving the clapper and hitting it, that's.
You're ringing
shows
it
in the
now?
Picture.
No, that bell probably belonged once or twice.
we ring it on Sunday before church. We don't.
No, that was discontinued. The last time that bell was rung was probably 2 weeks ago, and it was rung 8 times on a Sunday like that.
Could we state that? I would recommend you don't ring the bell, given what this report is saying.
Yeah, that's,
For any reason?
yes.
I think Christmas Day, there is a plan to ring the, and it's a tradition to
Can I
ring
get-
the bell on Christmas Day. So you have to talk to Reverend Sherry about that, Don, if it's. you know,
Well, okay.
I don't think it's an instant problem. What they were saying is that long-term, if you keep ringing the bell that way, that's,
Yeah.
it could cause
That's either. Wait and see. I have nothing else on this. Does anybody want to bring anything else up? Okay. Take a motion to adjourn.
Ann,
Yeah.
Greg,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Joe, Harry,
Aye.
Jay,
Aye.
Andy,
I don't know, I want to talk about the bell some more. I think-
Scott.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. This is very
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.